Oh, welcome everyone. Sorry for any technical difficulties. They're all because of me and Matt Helmers at Iowa State University, and any problems are because of me, as usual. Um, but I'm really excited to get to host the webinar today. I'm always excited, but super excited to hear about this from some folks in Wisconsin. And again, this is part of the Iowa Learning Farms Conservation Webinar Series. Iowa Learning Farms is a partnership of the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, the Iowa DNR, USDA NRCS, and Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, among many other partners. Again, excited to get to host the webinar and hear about this. So we're going to hear about using data to understand farmer sustainability journeys. Jenny Seifert and Amy, she'll have to correct me. Skolas Cole. So Amy, you're gonna, yeah, again, I'm like all on everything I'm doing today is wrong, but we're excited to hear about understanding data or using data to understand farmers' sustainability journeys. And as always, if you have questions, please type those in the chat box, and we will get to as many of those as we can within the time that we have from our speakers today. So I'm going to turn it over to you. I've done enough verbal messing up for today. Jenny and Amy, the virtual floor is all yours.
Well, and we're really glad to be here. So Matt, no worries, and thanks for the floor. I'm Amy Skoczlas Cole with Trust and Food at Farm Journal, and Jenny and I are going to share a little bit of information about some work that we've done together. And Jenny will set the context. So I've got your slides, Jenny, and I'll just click as you tell me to do so.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. So just to step back, so as Amy mentioned, the work that you're going to be seeing today is either directly part of or related to a project that we partnered on called Cultivating Farmer Leaders and Farmer-to-Farmer Learning in the Mississippi and Atchafalaya River Basin. So we were fortunate to get some funding from EPA, US EPA, from their Gulf of America's Farmer-to-Farmer grant program to do this work together. You see the partners, their logos are on the bottom of the slide. But the overall goal of this project was to really expand farmer to farmer learning and leadership through three things: sort of developing a research-based training to empower farmers to be conservation leaders, to see how we could augment sort of traditional relationship-driven farmer outreach with data-driven communication campaigns. And that's where Trust and Food came in. And then evaluating that work to see what kind of outcomes we got. And so next slide, please. And so what I'm going to really focus on is that first bullet was the farmer leadership training. And I want to introduce first some work that came before this project that really sets the stage for it. And first of all, sort of what is it that we mean by farmer leadership? What does it look like? And so there was some work done previously that looked at ways farmers can be leaders in watershed management and or conservation. And there are sort of four ways farmers can lead, and that could be lead by example, which is maybe the most basic way that farmers can be leaders. There's peer-to-peer community or peer-to-peer leadership, and that means things like serving as a mentor, maybe hosting field days or talking to neighbors. There's consultation, so that's sort of serving as a farmer advisor. And then at decision making, that's sort of a more formal leadership role. So there's multiple levels of leadership, and that's sort of what we're referring to here. And so next slide, please, Amy. And so with farmer leadership, there's been a lot of work to really cultivate farmer leaders and sort of help support farmer-led conservation efforts. Through these efforts, as with most volunteer-led efforts, challenges arise. And when I say volunteer-led, I mean the farmers who are part of these farmer-led conservation groups or efforts, whatever you want to call them, they are often volunteers. And so, like any volunteer-led effort, some challenges arise, and those include some leadership fatigue. So if farmers are tapped over and over again to give field days, give talks, et cetera, they can sort of get burnt out. There's also, concern around the long-term sustainability of farmer-led groups. How do you recruit new farmer leaders? And then when you have recruited new farmer leaders, maybe they don't feel fully equipped to be leaders. And so how can we improve their leadership skills? So these are some of the challenges that the work that we did are really trying to address. Next slide, please, Amy. And so the way we sort of went about thinking about farmer leadership and sort of what it looks like and what it takes to be an effective farmer leader, we did a couple of things. We first looked at the leadership theory. There's tons of leadership theory out there, literature out there. There are whole sort of graduate programs on leadership, so I can't get into everything here, but I'll give you a mashup of some of the theories that we looked at. We looked at transformational leadership, which is really about bringing about change in individuals and systems. So it's really leadership to lead change. There's champions of innovation, which is, somebody being the face of an innovation and helping to increase the uptake of that innovation. Civic capacity refers to public service engagement. Boundary spanning really refers to sort of the capacity to build expansive social networks, all related to change. And then servant leadership is really leading by serving others. So these are some of the leadership theories that when we were thinking about what farmer leadership looks like and what skills are necessary for farmer leadership, we drew from these theories. Next slide, please. What we also did to sort of develop this framework was focus groups and interviews with farmer leaders themselves, as well as conservation professionals who support farmer leaders and farmer-led conservation. And so we did several focus groups and interviews, and I'm not going to be able to get into all of that data right now, but some of the qualitative data from those focus groups. These are some quotes, sort of some exemplary quotes from those interactions to sort of show sort of how we sort of pulled out some elements and themes from those responses. And so I'll just read a couple of them. One respondent talked about, I will say that a good farmer leader isn't shy about telling their story. So storytelling is really important, is what they're getting at there. To lead a group, you just have to be willing to do it. So that was really important. That sort of willingness to lead being really important. So again, this is just sort of trying to illustrate how we looked at this data to sort of pull out some themes that could help us develop a framework. So next slide, please. And so what makes a farmer leader in conservation? So I'm going to show you two different things. First, this first set of attributes, if you will, of farmer leadership. And these are really ways of thinking about how you can identify an individual farmer who might be a potential leader in their community. And then I'm also going to show you a set of core competencies or skills that are necessary for effective farmer leadership. And again, these attributes and skills or core competencies are so the framework that we developed based on this literature review of leadership theory and these focus groups and interviews. And so in terms of these attributes, I'll just read them here. The biggest themes that arose were integrity, credibility, humility. Interestingly, that idea of humility came up a lot in our interviews, especially in terms of what makes a farmer a good leader. Leadership commitment, that really gets to willingness to lead. Vision, so vision for the future and sort of what the community could look like. An experimental mindset, so a willingness to experiment and try new things on their operations. Encouraging others, so being willing to be a mentor, being willing to talk to their neighbor about or even, lend a piece of farming equipment to help them do no-tiller or something like that. And then finally, stewardship and conservation ethic. That's probably a no-brainer, but that is also sort of important attribute of a farmer leader in conservation. And I will say that this is, we are not arguing this is a very complete list. This is sort of what we found in our research, and we'd love to sort of, the idea of developing this framework was really to create a base that could be built on by others. So next slide, please, Amy. And then when it comes to core competencies or sort of those important skills and knowledge that farmer leaders might need to be effective in the conservation realm, they really fall into three different categories. And I want to specify here that if you recall back to the sort of different ways farmers can lead, we really focused on that peer-to-peer leadership for this because we felt that was sort of the most accessible form of leadership. Not every farmer is going to be willing to be the president of a group, for example, but more farmers might be willing to talk to their neighbors or host a field day. And so we wanted to sort of really focus on that sort of way of leading that more farmers can potentially engage with. And so in terms of core competencies, again, this is what we found in our research or what we concluded through our research. There's sort of subject matter literacy that includes things like conservation literacy, watershed literacy, and systems thinking, communication skills, and social capital. And I'm going to get into these in more detail in the next few slides. So next slide, please, Amy. So in terms of subject matter literacy, what we mean by that, probably pretty obvious conservation literacy is really just the firsthand knowledge and experience with conservation systems. Watershed literacy refers to a basic understanding of water resources issues, especially in their own local watersheds. And then systems thinking is really a basic understanding of and appreciation for systems, so the components and relationships within agroecosystems, watersheds, etc. Next slide, please. And then communication skills, the three big ones that we homed in on here are listening, so really the capacity to hear others' needs and experiences. Storytelling, with both a willingness to share their story as well as a capacity to do so in a way that motivates farmers. And then persuasion and or understanding audiences. So basically what we mean by that is sort of knowledge about how to influence farmers who might have varying values and perspectives about conservation practices. So learning how to sort of frame messages in a way that helps move a farmer to do something new. So next slide, please. And then finally, that final bucket of core competencies is social capital. And what this is referring to is really relationships and networks and sort of that are really necessary to sort of make change happen. And so elements of social capital, competencies within social capital include relationship building, so developing new relationships and maintaining existing ones. Boundary spanning, that's that builds on relationship building, but that really means building relationships with individuals or organizations outside of their own network. So if you can imagine a farmer who has built a relationship with their NRCS agent or with their FSA agent or with their county conservation person. So sort of really getting outside of their own personal network. And then civic capacity is that sort of that ability to get involved in civic organizations and networks to identify and address community interests and needs. So that is sort of the full bucket of core competencies that we identified through our research. And then what we did with those competencies was that we developed a training based on it that we are very excited to launch very soon. And Amy, if you want to go to the next slide. And that training is called Skills for Building Farmer Networks for Conservation. This is a really hot off the press training. We haven't really started promoting it yet, but you all are getting a preview of it. If you go to that QR code, you can access it. But this is a training that brings together most, but not all of those core competencies into one curriculum that is intended for folks who support farmers to deliver a training to, so the target audience for the training is farmers, but the target users are people who work with farmers to do conservation. And so the training has 3 different modules: watershed literacy, communication skills, and social capital. And it really covers some big themes within those core competencies to help farmers feel equipped and confident to take on the role of a peer leader in conservation. I'm not going to get too deep into this training because we have actually a lunch and learn coming up where you can get into more details, but I just wanted to sort of say that this training really pulls together our research into something that can be used to really empower farmers to be leaders. And we did pilot this training, so we tested it out to see how well it worked. And Amy, if you want to go to the next slide. And just some results from that pilot training. So we piloted it in 3 different watersheds within the Mississippi River Basin, one in Wisconsin, one in Indiana, and one in Arkansas, really the states represented by land-grant universities. And some of the results that I'll share here are that the participants who were involved in the training, they valued the learning about message framing and the importance of conversation. So again, the communication skills and relationship building skills. Participants felt most confident about the skills they gained in storytelling. And that participants who were also, as a result of the training, interested in implementing new conservation practices and or mentoring fellow farmers. And then finally, something that we learned sort of through our recruitment of farmers to come to this training was that really relationship-driven outreach was really important for recruiting farmers to be participants in this leadership training. I can talk a little bit more about that too if folks are interested in learning more. So next slide, please, Amy. So again, if you're interested in learning more details about this training and how you could use it in your own programming to support farmer leaders in conservation, I invite you to our Lunch and Learn, which will be Thursday, June 19th at 11:30 Central. And again, who is this for? Who this Lunch and Learn is for and who the curriculum is for as a tool is conservation professionals or conservation outreach professionals who support farmer-led efforts. And there's a QR code there to register. And I think I have one more slide. Yes, another resource to throw at you is this is actually a predecessor training to the one I just talked about. It's called Tap Your Potential, a training to go farmer leadership and watershed management. This one really focuses mostly on watershed literacy and gets into way more detail on watershed literacy than the newer training does. And so if you're interested in that, I wanted to sort of mention this other resource that's available to you. And so next slide, Amy. So some key takeaways. we hope that the attributes and the competencies that I really quickly went through are really there to sort of guide the recruitment of farmer leaders, and guide their leadership development. And so again, we're not saying this is the only way to think about farmer leadership, but we're saying this is a way that can hopefully help be supportive of folks who are working with farmers in conservation and farmer-led conservation. We also hope that the sort of this work sort of helps to normalize the importance of soft skills for farmer leadership. If you notice, a lot of the core competencies are not the hard technical skills about conservation. They're really about relationships, communication, et cetera. So those soft skills are important. And then again, when you're recruiting farmer leaders, at least investing in relationship-driven outreach is really important. So that is all I have, and I want to hand the baton to Amy.
Okay, fabulous. Thanks for that, Jenny. So I'm going to pick up the ball. If you think about Jenny's first slide, she talked about a couple of the goals that the project had. And one of the goals was augmenting relationship-driven farmer outreach with data-driven communication campaigns. So I'm going to pick up the ball, talk a little bit about what we did there, and then give a couple of, depending on time, one or more examples of ways that we have worked with other academic institutions and research organizations in order to try to take that kind of approach. That's interesting. You're seeing a white slide. Okay. Love it when slides don't show builds. Okay. When I start talking about data at Farm Journal and Trust and Food, the first question that I usually get is, what kind of data do you have and where does it come from? So let me just, knock that out right up front here. So Farm Journal, we are usually I ask folks in the audience if you've heard of Farm Journal or if you received Farm Journal, but since I can't see you all right now, I'm just going to say, by way of introduction, Farm Journal is a large information and media organization. We're 148 years old. And over those years, we've earned the trust of America's farmers and ranchers. And so today we're actually the most read, the most watched, and the most listened to source of information in agriculture across the board. And those interactions with our audiences, with that information and that content, gives us a ton of information and data back. So part of what you see in the screen is all of the information, news that we provide out to different segments of agriculture. So all of that comes in. It's first-party data that farmers and ranchers are giving us of their own free will. It's audited, it's verified, and then we match it up with data that we're gathering from other sources. You all researchers may be working with like FSA data sets and others. So we're, adding that in. And then we've got a lot of data partnerships like with the American Society of Agronomy that also augment data. And so what we get is a pretty good 360-degree view of each individual producer and their sphere of influence and sort of what's important to them. This is not rocket science. I mean, we have amazing data scientists behind the scene knitting all of this together, but it's not rocket science. It's a lot of what, retailers and consumer packaged good companies and others are using about us as consumers to understand and segment us, not by like where we live or what we look like, but by how we think and how we make decisions. And that's really important in the sphere of conservation agriculture, because we all know that if we want to accelerate change across an acre or a head of livestock, that it's actually a human being that makes that decision. And I think that's probably where the University of Wisconsin team, and we probably first had our first meeting of the minds, is, farmer to farmer learning is, someone that is trusted, being trusted by someone else to influence them. It's about the people. And so much of conservation agriculture can often be about the land and the water and the air that we're stewarding. This is sort of an additional dimension to that kind of work. We have an entire team at Farm Journal called Trust and Food, which is a team that I lead, which is really dedicated to figuring out how do we help understand what producers want and need and put that information in the center of helping producers connect with technical assistance and financial incentives and putting change across the ground. And the reason that we do that is because we understand that not only are producers being asked to maybe undertake a conservation agriculture change, but because there are thousands of decisions, literally thousands of decisions that producers need to make each season and each year about how they're going to manage their operation. And so we want to make sure that the information and guidance and support that's being provided meets what they need dead on. So, just a little bit in terms of kind of theory of how we work. One of the things that we saw early on in our work was that we had this great early adopter set, right? Across conservation agriculture, we can name the names. They're folks that, stepped forward. They were leaders. They were some of our first peer network leaders for peer networks that we ran or that Jenny ran or many of you may have run. But that was a distinct characteristic of a human being, right? The way that they showed up, the way that they thought, may look and feel differently. And what we realize is that not every human being can be an early adopter. I mean, almost by definition, right? And so what we're acknowledging is that with that first group of folks who put our first acres under cover crops and no-till and multi-species cropping systems are not going to make decisions and look and feel the same as the next group of people that might be likely to do that. And so what we're actually doing at Farm Journal Trust in Food is measuring, or assessing is probably a better term, producers across the United States according to what we would call the human dimensions of change. And so, differently than sort of geographic or agronomic or even, operational economic information, what we're asking is, who are these folks? What's important to them? What are their goals? And where are they on their journeys so that we can line up the support that they get with what they want and need. Important to note that this is not survey data. This is data science that is derived from information that I showed you sort of in that first slide with a data science model that looks at all of these attributes. So we measure these 4 attributes, and they are independent variables from one another. The first is understanding. Are you aware of what soil health principles are? Do you understand what it would look like on your operation with your particular needs? Do you see value in that, in those, say, soil health principles? Do you see how it could meet one of your goals specifically? Do you think about how it lines up with how you as a producer present your business and your operation to the world? We all know folks who are, kind of the farm weird guys, and they're different than the folks who want to be mainstays of their community. They just have different kinds of values that they line up with. Feeling capable is really important. There's lots of great research out there about what barriers are to conservation agriculture. What we're looking at here is, how do people assess their own capability of making change? And finally, what is a trigger to action? What would spur them to take a next step, and who do they trust? And that became particularly important when we looked at the farmer leader, farmer participant cohort split with our friends at University of Wisconsin. Just diving into a little bit of what we did in this case was, there was a question raised: could we identify from the data who would be a likely peer network leader, farmer leader, and then who would be a likely participant in a farmer peer network group, and then maybe who is not interested in playing either of those roles, would not be likely to learn and experience the world that way. So we went through a methodology that first looked at literature and information and identified what do we believe to be the indicators of conservation leadership in communities, and then what separately looked to be indicators of participation in peer networks. And from there, we went into our data and scored producers against those traits. And I hate the term score, because there's no value being assigned here. It's not like you're good or bad, but what this does allow us to do, if we can say this is the group of people who are most likely to be leaders, and we can have a smaller group than, every farmer in the watershed to talk to, we can ensure that the scarce resources that we're all working with are used effectively, and we can have a higher conversion rate of people that we approach to be farmer leaders together with, their acceptance of such. So we kind of bucketed folks into these groups. And then from there, we looked at what were the differences between them. And that was information that we provided to colleagues in order to do the messaging and the outreach and engagement. And so, you might want to understand how these groups are different for very specific messaging. So what you see up here is a message that was developed for farmer leaders that really leaned into one of the things we saw, which was that they like to share their ideas and their journey. They're comfortable with that. A call to action to service in that way was going to be effective. And then we also looked at where do these cohorts have something in common so that you could do outreach to all of them about the fact that these great peer networks exist. Created a profile to guide strategy and outreach, and then created activation campaigns for each of these groups. Jenny, I'm going to pause there for just a second. Is there anything about our work together that you want to add or provide context on? I think I have time maybe to do one more case study just to give folks a flavor of how else we have used data to do work.
No, I think you gave a good summary, Amy. And maybe we can address any sort of question marks in the questions part.
Okay, perfect. Great. Okay, I have to get my cursor back. Okay, there we go. So another piece of research and work that we have just wrapped up and launched into the world that I thought would be cool to talk about because it uses data in a slightly different way, is work that we've done with the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef and their partners. I'm actually on a webinar at 3 o'clock today talking about this in case you want to join. If this is your world, probably not, but just in case. And so this was using data in the same kind of data in a different way to answer a different kind of research question. So this group had a goal of getting 385 million acres under written grazing management plans by 2050. And one of the challenges they had was that this data set did not exist. We did not know how many ranchers had or did not have grazing management plans. Additionally, they wanted to understand, are there differences between folks who have these plans and like written down and formalized and folks who would tell you they have a plan but don't have it written down? So kind of quantitative and qualitative look at this. So what we did was using the data and information that we had, we actually created this kind of pathway to have predicted non-observable practice data. And then we bumped up that data model and prediction with actual survey data to ask people whether they had or did not have grazing management plans until we got the model to a high degree of predictability. Then from there, we created profiles for each group that highlighted, just like we did with Wisconsin, what was similar and what was different about them. And then in this case, the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef is evaluating those recommendations to decide how to reach groups effectively. One of the sort of aha moments that we had in this research was that 40% of all, so let me take one step back. We found that only about 10% of ranchers had a written grazing management plan. And so they were not on their own very far along to their 385 million acre goal, right? So when you look at it that way, it seemed very daunting. But then one of the big ahas was that almost half of ranchers told us they did have a plan, it just hadn't been written down. And so now the task for putting conservation on the ground looks like help ranchers write that plan down, rather than, try to educate them on the value of a plan or, what the component pieces are. It's like, how do we get them written down? And again, that's a more we can be more efficient and effective with the dollars that we have available to us to put that in place when we know very specifically what the challenge is. The last thing maybe that I'll do here is just show sort of what it looks like when we put profile data together. And so this is a profile of ranchers that did have that written grazing management plan. Like I said, it was about 10% of ranchers, about 44 million acres of grazing land. And you can see that we're able to look at the size and scale, so demographic, geographic information. What do their operations look like? What else are they farming or ranching alongside? But then it's the bottom of the slide that's this kind of more human data that is really helpful when you're putting strategies together. So, what kinds of information are they out looking for? That's under topics of interest. And so these ranchers are really looking at data, risk, succession planning, and then what are their attitudes and beliefs? And I'll just draw your attention towards the attitude towards change and what those look like. And then I'll show you what it looks like for the folks who don't have a written grazing management plan. So in that bottom quadrant there where it says attitude towards change, you see that they index highly on being ambitious and driven. You also see that they are influenced by friends and neighbors, celebrities, and public figures. So this influenced by was also the type of data that we helped the Wisconsin team out with for our peer networking work. So I'll just click to show that if you look at ranchers that had an unwritten grazing management plan, who would have answered the question like, yes, I do believe I have a plan, but it is not written down. They actually look different in terms of size, in terms of what they're interested in and what kind of information they're looking for in the world, and their comfort with change. Additionally, and probably kind of a little bit of a challenge, is they are less influenced by friends, neighbors, public figures. And so that tells us that the way to reach these folks to help them get their plan written down may not be the same way that we helped the first 10% getting written down. Okay, I know I have multiple more slides actually in case studies, but I will just put up my email as well so that folks have that. And then Matt, I know we wanted to leave plenty of times for questions and comments, and I can't read the chat while I'm presenting here, so I'll let you dive in here.
Yep. And hopefully there are a few, logistical slides that we'll go through here. If you watch this webinar live and are wanting to earn a CCA CEU, please email Elena Whitaker at alenaw@iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today. Include your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. Again, alenaw@iastate.edu. We can go to the next slide, Amy. If you watch this webinar live and are willing to fill out a voluntary survey, we'd greatly appreciate it. Only one survey response is needed for all 2025 webinars. This is a voluntary demographic survey for USDA-funded programs. You can scan that QR code or go to iowalearningfarms.org/survey. Again, if you've done it in 2025, thank you very much. And if you're willing, we would greatly appreciate that. Let's put a plug in for the next webinar. Next slide. Okay, we have John Lohr talking to us from Minnesota about utilizing stream restoration to improve the physical, chemical, and biological integrity of Minnesota watersheds. God, I can't talk today. So if you don't think we have variety, last week we talked about wasp. This week we talked about farmer decision making, and next week we're going to talk about stream restoration. I mean, we got some diversity. We got a variety of topics on our webinar series. Okay, and as always, this one, as long as the recording worked, and I think we got multiple recordings, please go to the Iowa Learning Farms webinars page for the archive view of this. And you can go to the YouTube channel as well, Iowa Learning Farms webinars YouTube channel. So you can go back. I think some others commented some great pieces of information and figures and graphs in this. And so, if you want to take a look at those again, please go watch the archive. Yep, Elena already said the recording will be posted this afternoon. So Okay, we had a few questions come in. One of the things I'm going to take my prerogative as a moderator and ask this interesting thing on the grazing management between those that had a written grazing management and didn't. I noticed that, the trust that they had in different sources, and I noticed that I think for those that had the written plan, they had a high trust in the internet on mobile or internet on computer, whereas those that didn't, that was the low area. And so it was just completely flip-flopped in, what I guess what sources of information they trusted. Was that surprising to you? And I think you maybe commented that, that might influence how we reach folks, but maybe just any comments you have on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the really big advantages of doing this kind of work is it helps you on a couple of dimensions. It helps you see the differences in folks and, sort of their attitudes and how they're thinking and what information they're looking for. So that helps with your messaging. But yeah, it's also incredibly important to reach people with, not just where do we find them spending their minutes, but where are they seeing trust in those sources of information. And so it's actually very common when we get segmentation right. We're able to group people in ways that we can see differences. So it's very, very common for us to see that, for instance, you're absolutely right, the folks with the unwritten grazing management plan were not super trustworthy of information that they were getting digitally, over a computer. The folks who had the written grazing management plan, that was the top way to reach them. So
Maybe illustrates we need to have all those different communication methods because our audience is not this homogeneous unit. Now, this is coming from, an ag engineer, but I think about sometimes when we say, oh, we need to use social media, we need to use the internet. Well, there are a lot of people that still may get information from newspapers, radio, that kind of thing, depending on what category they're in.
yes. And like if we had all the money in the world, that would be
Yeah.
absolutely what I would recommend, right? All ag
Yeah.
information for
Yeah.
everyone, all the time, every
Yeah.
which way. I think we would all love that. If we have to make choices, it's good to have the data make choices. And I'm going to just take this moment to make a plug. One of the things that my slide didn't necessarily show, but in data that we have seen, there really is not the generational split that we might imagine there to be. So it's not that one were older and that's why they didn't like computers. Let's not bring that bias to our work because it's important because it's not true from the data that we see. It is more about your mindset and less about your age in terms of how comfortable you are with using digital tools, as well as information sources that are off the internet.
Great. Okay. Question for you, Jenny. Does your definition of farmer-led in this study include organizations with professional staff that report to farmer-led boards of directors? That model might be a good solution to some of the challenges you listed, including limited capacity and farmer burnout.
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes and no. I mean, the farmers that for example, the farmers that we interviewed for our focus groups and interviews, they represented a variety of ways that farmer-led efforts can exist. So they represented, for example, some of the farmer-led groups that are here in Wisconsin, which I think do fit the definition that Sean is talking about. That said, even if they have staff that support those groups, the farmers who are more active in those groups still sort of experience that burnout in terms of being on that board for so long or trying to recruit other farmers or still giving the field days and giving the talks. So there still is that burnout, even if there is support staff. And then just on the other side of the spectrum, some of the farmers that were represented in our focus groups were more independent sort of farmers that weren't really part of peer-led groups, or farmer-led groups, but they might have been perceived as farmers or farmer leaders for conservation in their communities. So I would say that it is helpful. It is very helpful when there's that professional staff, and because a lot of farmers, their full-time job is to farm and not to sort of run an organization. And I think that even in those instances, that burnout can still happen.
Okay. Great. Next one. For your training, Jenny, who will that be delivered to? NRCS and state conservation professionals? Question mark?
Yeah, it's the variety of conservation outreach professionals out there who work with farmers on conservation, who are specifically also interested in sort of building farmer leadership in conservation. So that could be NRCS, that could be county conservation, that could be state conservation, that could be NGOs, it could be soil and water conservation districts. So really the gamut of conservation professionals to do this work.
Great. Maybe the next one is, how did you characterize the individuals into leadership categories? Was that through interviews, third-party observation, questionnaire?
Yeah, and I'm curious what exactly, if that's referring to the sort of types of leadership. So we talked about like peer-to-peer leadership and consultation leadership and decision-making leadership, or if that's referring to the attributes. In terms of those types of leadership, we didn't categorize people into those. I guess what we're not advocating that people categorize farmers into those categories. It's kind of self-selecting what farmers are willing to do, really. But those are sort of, we identified those as various ways that a farmer could be a leader in conservation. So they could be a more sort of peer-to-peer leader where they're just talking to their neighbors, giving field days, serving as a mentor, or they could be all the way up to sort of being the president of a group. And that is really farmers really self-select to do that. But we're trying to just sort of demonstrate that being a leader doesn't mean that you're always at the podium giving the speeches.
Okay.
There's many ways of being a leader.
Yeah. Kind of maybe following along with that in a few ways. This person, indicated when thinking about peer-to-peer mentor programs within soil health, it seems like many farmers have hesitation when it comes to their experience. They indicated that their area is doing a paid peer-to-peer mentor program around cover crops and reduced tillage practices. Many of the people they've had in mind as mentors have hesitations, even though they have years of experiences using these practices. How could these programs maybe be useful to help folks feel more comfortable as a mentor?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly getting to some of the challenges that we're trying to address, through this training. I think that even if, a farmer, from the outside seems like could be a good leader in soil health or conservation, they might not always feel that way. So something that we did find in the focus groups that we did was that maybe like all people, but very few farmers are willing to say, "Oh, I'm a leader."
Yeah.
Like that's not where that humility comes in, right? Like they just don't want to put themselves out there like that. And so, but it's really about how you frame it. It's the curriculums, especially, it doesn't really use the word leadership throughout the curriculum because we understand that there's that hesitancy, that sort of fear around that term. And so it's really about how do we empower farmers to use leadership skills. So not calling it so directly a leader, but saying like, here is how you can sort of tell your story around conservation, and sort of here's how you can build certain relationships. So it's really sort of an indirect way of sort of building those leadership skills, so that even if they're unwilling to sort of call themselves a leader, they feel more confident in sort of practicing those skills. And so I think in terms of that mentorship program specifically, I think, thinking about it in the way of how can you build confidence in those individuals to be mentors rather than, because I think part of it might be just that they're not feeling sort of fully confident to sort of play that role. And so how can you increase their confidence to play that role?
Great. Somebody asked if your work, Jenny, was being shared with DATCP, with
DATCP.
DATCP? Yes.
That is
okay.
the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Relations.
Okay, all right.
Consumer Protection.
Like, God, I don't know that acronym. So okay.
But yes,
all right.
we are sharing it with DATCP, and I appreciate that.
Okay.
Question.
Great. Okay, somebody did indicate. Can you elaborate a little more, I think this is for Amy, on why it's important for the grazing management plan to be written down? And they indicated they know there's research about how writing down goals can be an important step, but is it possible that folks without written plans have a different value system or triggers for action and are unaffected by the management plan being written?
That is a great question. So let me take it in a couple of parts. First, it wasn't our goal to have it written down, right? This is what the members of the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef decided as their target for the cow-calf sector. And I imagine that one of the reasons that they wanted it written down is because it's something that is verifiable. And so if what you're trying to do across a supply chain is understand that certain things have happened, it is hard to see what is in someone's head. And so that is one piece of it. But I think the question actually hints at something that we did very much see, which is that there are sort of broader approaches to their operational management between folks who have written plans and those who don't. And I cast no value judgments across these different groups. The folks who had a plan, as we saw, were a smaller number of acres. I'm just going back to the slides to make sure that I get it all right. They were a little bit larger. They had slightly larger operations. And I can tell you through survey work that we had done as follow-up that folks who had a plan also reported to us, a written plan, I should say, also reported to us that they had a succession plan for their operation, meaning how's it going to go from one generation to another, at a far higher rate than folks who did not have a written plan. And so there certainly is something that you can say about what someone's operating style may look like from these kinds of data points that we're gleaning. But countering that, I should also say that the data was neck and neck on once someone had a plan, written or unwritten, they told us that they referred to them at least once a week when making decisions. And there really was not a split between those who were written and those who were unwritten. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to ask the question, is writing it down the most important thing to get done? Or are we looking at how robust those plans are in addressing the kinds of conservation and operational goals someone might be facing in their operation?
Okay, thank you. Next question might be our last in the interest of time, but what are some of the broad data characteristics for middle adopter row crop farmers in the Midwest? They're not a homogeneous group, but this person's curious, what about your data? But they're curious about what your data says broadly about this group of producers.
Yeah. I think that the interesting thing about the data is that, like, I don't want to punt on that question, but I'm going to, because you actually have to ask the question, like, it is not a homogenous group, right? And so many of the things that we believe to be true about row crop producers in the Midwest, do show for those folks who are in the middle of the adoption curve. They have more concerns about risk than upside. And so, like, when we're putting information out there, we might not want to say, hey, $15 an acre for a practice. We may want to say, let's show how this practice is going to insulate you from, drought or severe weather, extreme rain or whatever. I'm in Minnesota, so extreme rain, right? And so, like, looking at risk is more important to them. They're not chasing that, like, extra marginal dollar. The other thing that is true is that they are more comfortable in the status quo, like personality wise. They're just not always, the kinds of folks who feel like they need a lot of variety and thrive on that. But one case study I didn't get to, but I'm going to give you resources for so you can go look on your own, is called reachfarmersfaster.org. Reachfarmersfaster.org. This is work that we did with Environmental Initiative and the Midwest Row Crop Collaborative. And we looked at row crops in 3 different places and segmented the middle adopters in each of those. And at reachfarmersfaster.org, we have the results of the work that we did to actually say, how do these folks in the middle of the adoption curve look different than others, and how might we reach them? One of the things that was super fascinating to me there was that feeling in the driver's seat of your operation, like this sense of, Jenny is 100% right, farmers won't call themselves leaders, but feeling like they were among the upper echelon of their community and in the driver's seat of their operation was a really powerful message to help get them engaged in making change. And would love to hear from anybody who's interested in more specific information about your place, and your cohort. It can be a county, it can be a state, it can be a region, it can be a crop. We can look at anything for y'all. We'd love to do that.
All right. Well, I think in the interest of time, we will leave it there and really thank Amy and Jenny for a great presentation today. I think important information. And just to put a plug in, Jenny put many links in the chat box. So while we finish up, please go and get those for sources of information or upcoming programs. So it's really great. I think many of those will probably be in the ILF blog that is written, not we, I should say, that somebody else writes. I don't write the blog that recaps the webinar, but that'll be out there as well, so that you can likely find. Yep, Elena says she'll be putting the links in the blog. So yep, I figured Elena would get that done. So thank you again, Jenny and Amy. Again, if folks need a CCA CEU, please email Elena Whitaker, ENAW@iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today with your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. And please tune in next week to hear about work in Minnesota on stream restoration. With that, Amy and Jenny, thank you so very much today.